Good evening, boys and girls. Thank you for joining me tonight. I'd like to read you a bedtime story. So if you want to pause the video and get comfy, maybe grab a stuffed animal or something like that, I'd like to read a bedtime story with you and just get cozy and snuggle up together. Hope you have on your pajamas and your teeth are brushed, and we'll read a story together tonight. I have a very special story for us to read together, and it's about a little lamb, and he finds comfort with a very special friend. So I brought my special friend tonight with me. Little glasses so I can read, and if you need to pause the video at any time, you can pause it and get what you need to be comfy. Each night during Holy Week, I hope you'll join me and we'll read a special story together to celebrate this time. Tonight's story is called The Crippled Lamb. Can you see that pretty good? So I'll read it and I'll show you the pictures from each page, okay? All right. I'm glad to be able to spend this time with you. I brought something else special too to go along with the story. This normally is in my bedroom. This right here I made in 1989 for my mom and dad. So it just reminds me a lot of this special story, and it's pretty old, and that was my handwriting back then. It's improved a little. The Crippled Lamb by Max Lucado. You see that right there? Sweet little lamb. Once upon a time, in a sunny valley, there lived a little lamb named Joshua. He was white with black spots, black feet, and sad eyes. Josh felt sad when he saw other lambs with snow-white wool and no spots. He felt sad when he saw other sheep with their moms and dads because he didn't have a mom or a dad. But he felt the saddest when he saw other lambs running and jumping because he couldn't. Josh had been born with one leg that didn't work right. He was crippled. He always limped when he walked. That's why he always watched while other lambs ran and played. Josh felt sad and alone, except when Abigail was around. You see Abigail? Abigail was Josh's best friend. She didn't look like a friend for a lamb. She was an old cow. She was brown with white blotches that looked like rain puddles on a path. Her belly was round as a barrel, and her voice was always kind and friendly. Some of Josh's favorite hours were spent with Abigail. They loved to pretend they were on adventures in distant lands. Josh liked to listen to Abigail tell stories about the stars. They would spend hours on the hill looking into the valley. They were good friends, but even with a friend like Abigail, Josh still got sad. It made him sad to be the only lamb who could not run and jump and play in the grass. That's when Abigail would turn to him and say, "Don't be sad, little Joshua. God has a special place for those who feel left out." I imagine sometimes we're sad right now because we can't play with our friends. Josh wanted to believe her, but it was hard. Some days he just felt alone. He really felt alone the day the shepherds decided to take the lambs to the next valley where there was more grass. The sheep had been in this valley so long, the ground was nearly bare. All the sheep were excited when the shepherd told them they were going to a new meadow. Do you see that picture? As they prepared to leave, Josh hobbled over and took his place on the edge of the group. But the others, they started laughing at him. "You're too slow to go all the way to the next valley. Go back, Slowpoke. We'll never get there if Josh comes with us." That's when Josh looked up and saw his shepherd standing in front of him. "They are right, my little Joshua. You better go back. This trip is too long for you. Go and spend the night in the stable." Josh looked at the man for a long time. Then he turned slowly and began limping away. When Josh got to the top of the hill, he looked down and saw the other sheep headed toward the green grass. Never before had he felt so left out. A big tear slipped out of his eye. Never before had he cried so hard, and the tears rolled down his nose, and it fell on a rock. Just then he heard Abigail behind him, and Abigail said what she always said when Josh felt sad. "Don't be sad, little Joshua. God has a special place for those who feel left out." Slowly, the two friends turned and walked to the stable together. By the time they got to the little barn, the sun was setting like a big orange ball. Josh and Abigail went inside and began to eat some hay out of the feed box. They were very hungry, and the hay tasted good. For a little while, Joshua forgot that he had been left behind. "Go to sleep, little friend," Abigail said after they finished eating. "You've had a hard day." Josh was tired, so he lay down in the corner on some straw and he closed his eyes. He felt Abigail lay down beside him, and he was glad to have Abigail as a friend. Soon Josh was asleep. At first, he slept soundly, curled up against Abigail's back. In his sleep, he dreamed. He dreamed of running and jumping just like the other sheep. He dreamed of long walks with Abigail through the valley. He dreamed of being in a place where he never felt left out. Suddenly, a strange noise woke him up. "Abigail," he whispered, "wake up, I'm scared." Abigail lifted her big head and she looked around. The stable was dark except for a small lamp hanging on the wall. "Somebody is in here," Josh whispered. They looked across the dimly lit stable. There, lying on some fresh hay in the feed box, was a baby. A young woman was resting on a big pile of hay beside the feed box. Joshua looked at Abigail, thinking his friend could tell him what was going on. But Abigail was just as surprised as Josh at what he was seeing. See the baby and see the lady? Josh looked again at the woman and the child, then limped across the stable. He stopped next to the mother and looked into the baby's face. The baby was crying. He was cold. The woman picked up the baby and put him on the hay next to her. Josh looked around the stable for something to keep the baby warm. Usually there were blankets, but not tonight. The shepherds had taken them on the trip across the valley. See that? Then Josh remembered his own soft, warm wool. Timidly, he walked over and curled up close to the baby. "Thank you, little lamb," the baby's mother said softly. Soon, the little child stopped crying and went back to sleep. About that time, a man entered the stable carrying some rags. "I'm sorry, Mary," he explained. "This is all the cover I could find." "It's okay," she answered. "This little lamb has kept the new king warm." The new king warm. A king! Joshua looked at the baby and wondered who he might be. "His name is Jesus," Mary spoke, as if she knew Josh's question. "God's son, Jesus. He came from heaven to teach us about God." Mary, baby Jesus the King, Joseph, and there's little Joshua, the lamb, who was keeping the baby warm. Just then, there was another noise at the door. It was the shepherds, the ones who had left Joshua behind. Their eyes were big, and they were excited. "We saw a bright light and heard the angels," they began. Then they saw Joshua next to the baby. "Joshua, do you know who this baby is?" He does now. It was the young mother who was speaking. She looked at Joshua and smiled. "God has heard your prayers, little lamb. This baby is the answer." There. I just want to reread that. God has heard your prayers, little lamb. This little baby is the answer. Joshua looked down at the baby. Somehow he knew this was a special child, and this was a special moment. He also understood why he had been born with a crippled leg. Had he been born like the other sheep, he would have been in the valley. But since he was different, he was in the stable among the first to welcome Jesus into the world. He turned and walked back to Abigail and took his place beside his friend. He said to Abigail, "You were right," he told her. "God does have a special place for me." I really like what Abigail said to her friend, and she told him that God has a special place for him. Sometimes when we are alone, or we don't get to play with our friends or go to church or school like we want to, we know that Jesus is always there. Now, this might seem like a Christmas story to some. I think it's a great story for any time of year. I think it's a story to remind us that God is always with us. We're never alone, and we can always go to Him and we can pray. I'd like to pray with you now before you go to sleep. Dear Jesus, please watch over me in my sleep. Watch over my family and my friends, Lord, and help me to know how very special you made me. I know you'll always love me, Lord, and I love you too. Amen, and good night. Sweet dreams.